right. So, Mark, it's your first time here at MHP Festival. What was your first thought when you stepped into that festival?
It's big. It is a big festival, so it was great. Well organized, a lot of different things to see, tons of food, tons of areas to relax and find space, quiet spaces, but also spaces to listen to deep topics. So that that was really kind of the diversity. So young, old, something for everyone. I really like that. So.
Speaking of food, that's a very typical thing for Germany, and especially for the Swabian region. What is your favorite food so far?
So I have to tell you, I always, John F. Kennedy came to Berlin. He says, ich bin ein Berliner. Well, ich bin ein Schwäbikaner. I'm a Swabian Amerikaner. And so I grew up in Allgäu, and I also love the food in Schwabia. It's absolutely fabulous. I have dreams of Maultaschen and Butterpretzeln and all the great things my Austrian grandmother gave me, and because we grew up in Allgäu. So I also like the food. But I think any event, any festival, any place you go to, it's about not only the environment, not only the content that's disseminated, but how can you regenerate yourself through good food, good conversations, good drinks, so that it's that healthy balance of everything. If you're starving to death, you're not going to be able to listen to somebody speaking.
It's always the worst thing when food is running out, but it's not going to happen here. And it's also sustainable vegetarian food. That's what I love. If you were forced to find just one word for the MHP Festival, what would it be?
It's going to have to be what I'm going to talk about, symbiosis or the symbiocene.
Symbiocene, I think that's a good starting point. So let's go into our topic. Mark, you are the founder of Aloha's regenerative mission. You work for UN, for European Economic Forum, just to name some of your jobs, because you have a lot of jobs. And what I found also on LinkedIn, you work as a volunteer for Red Cross America. So that's all what I found on LinkedIn. Tell me something we should know about you, what is not on social media.
Yeah, great. I come from Germany's largest organic farmers, Europe's third largest organic farmers. So I grew up a lot to do with food and organic. It's the old Rudolf Steiner's, which is now biodynamic organics, but the Demeter standard. So that's really how I grew up, with around agriculture, animals, out in the countryside, with food, and that's a big part. Most people don't know that.
Yeah, I'm also kind of a, let's say, village girl, because I love nature. I grew up in a little village with around about 1,000 people or something like that. And I love when I go to my family and visit them. It's always quiet. And you see stars. That's what I like most. And that's what I want to prevent. So let's talk about our future. What is missing? Because you say you're someone who's really on a mission for our future. What is missing?
Really, that we, one, understand there are some big goals out there already. We have some plans for the future. One of them that most people don't know about is the Sustainable Development Goals. I wrote the manifesto for the Sustainable Development Goals for the United Nations. I did that so that people could envision what a world in December 2030 would feel like if we achieve all those goals. And those goals are not only a beautiful roadmap, a plan for the future, but they're also a lot to do with sustainability, resilience, and regeneration that can nudge us further towards that symbiocene that I talk about.
Yeah, but for me, when I went through these whole points of the goals, of the sustainability goals of the UN, I thought, oh my goodness, where should I start? I mean, it's about clean water, it's about education, it's about green energy. So how can we start to change that system? Are we already changing it? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so we have 7 years left to go until December 2030 to reach the goals, which is the Paris Agreement for 1.5 degrees of warming. But a lot of people don't understand who the goals are for. Are they for cities, countries, politicians, businesses. Who are they for? Well, they're for us as individuals. They're like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that they're made for us individually. And it's virtually impossible just to pick one goal and only work on that, because they're all tied together as a system. If you were to pick number one, it's red, no poverty, and just try to work on that, it's totally impossible. You would automatically work on all the other ones because they're all tied together as a system, and that's how we solve human suffering and our global grand challenges, through a systemic approach to tackling challenges. Instead of just taking a linear or siloed approach to solving human suffering and our problems, we need to take a systemic approach and address all the facets of a complex system. And that's where a lot of people get confused. Wow, a lot of goals, a lot of things to do. But that's a systemic approach, and we actually all function through multiple systems every single day. I'll give you just one example. Your body is made up of 11 systems, but not one of those systems controls the other 10. They're all autonomous, they're all a system of a system, and they work together gooey. But if you were to say, today, I'm just going to breathe, well, you'd probably die, because there's 10 other systems working at the same time that all need to function at the same time. But if you break a bone or you have a nervous system disorder, those other 10 systems try to compensate so that you don't become disabled or hindered. And that's how systems work together, all together in harmony.
But that's a very good metaphor. Let's stay at this metaphor. When I want to start, let's say, losing weight, it's so complicated. It's not just eat good food or do some sports. It's a very tricky thing because it's a system, and I need some trainer and I need some training plans. What kind of, let's say, training plans can we give, for example, people who are watching this, or companies? What could they change really tomorrow? Maybe we have an example for them, how they can start with these goals.
Yeah, I get asked that often. It's basically, what's the biggest thing that I could do, the one thing that I could do that'll have the biggest impact? And it's all the things that you do each and every day. And we started our conversation out by that, and that's food. The biggest way to draw down global warming and to address our climate is, number one, to globally reform our food system and how we eat and what kind of food we purchase. The second is to empower women. The third is to empower girls. And the fourth is to rethink how we do refrigeration globally. Those are the biggest levers to kind of draw down global warming, human suffering, and our global grand challenges. Now, there's many others down the line, but those are the top four, and those are all systemic approaches. First, you have to start with yourself, and it's little baby steps. You start out maybe eating one different thing a day, or changing your diet, or fress die Hälfte is what my Oma always used to say. Eat half, don't eat it all. And also consciously think, where do you buy? How do you consume? How do you spend your money? And then as you improve yourself, as you fix those things and you're okay, then you can start to help others and impact the world around you. But if you're struggling with yourself to address those needs, then it's going to be hard to go beyond that.
It's good to hear that you say there are still baby steps to go, because when you see all these goals, you think like, oh my goodness, we're never going to be there. We'll never tackle all things. But when you start tackling small things, I think you see, the impact of what you're doing. But speaking of impact, that is something I think it's very tricky when we have now ratings for sustainability of companies, for example. They are allowed to measure themselves. And actually, I wasn't sure, do I live sustainable? I thought I'm really doing good. And then I did a test online and I thought, goodness, I'm such a bad person. So how can we measure what we do in our progress?
So July 12th, 2021, the EU came out with the ESG taxonomy. And this year they came out with the CSRD. In order to get to ESG, we first had to have the Sustainable Development Goals, which paved the way. And so now there's SDGs, ESG, Scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, CSRD, and there's a lot of these big acronyms, but there's a lot of tools out there to help us go in the right direction of the new Green Deal. human rights reporting due diligence directives. So there's so many things that are helping us as individuals, but as organizations to do the proper reporting. Last year was very interesting because Deutsche Bank, I don't know if you heard about it, was raided for their customer files and documents because they had customers that were claiming something towards ESG and actually not being there. After they were raided, the very next day, Deutsche Bank, Commerzbank, and many other banks went to their clients and said, sorry, we can no longer be your bank because you're not complying with ESG. Well, the next phase is rolling out. It's called Corporate Social Reporting Directive, and that's a CSRD. That applies to all organizations in the European Union with 250 or more employees, and everybody's pretty much going to have to jump on that and be aware so that we ingrain sustainability, we ingrain the environment in the core of our business model so that we change how we do business for the future.
When I hear you talking, I always think he's so passionate and you really put a lot of effort into this topic. Did you just wake up one day and say, okay, I'm on a mission, I want to change the future and I want to make it sustainable?
No, actually, I can gladly tell you that story. So for 32 years, I've been doing this. But I am not a climate refugee. I wasn't struck by the climate lightning. I haven't seen the climate god. It was a gradual transition over time. It's kind of like changing habits. The lights just kept getting brighter, and there was, at one point, I could never go back. I could never see the world differently, and so it's very, very interesting how that works.
So what was your childhood dream in terms of a job? Was it far away from what you're doing today?
No. Some of my childhood dreams were always to be service to others, but I wanted to be an architect and kind of change the built environment. That was some of my dreams. But that gradual light and that transformation was one period of time over the next, and the lights got brighter and I could just never go back to seeing the world in a different way. Because sustainability, environmental, social governance, it's just a better model for life. Those people who applied it into their organization, their life, they've all come out through very hard economic times, through very hard social times, pandemics, doing pretty well because they had resilience, they had a good organizational structure to weather the storm.
And last point of our little interview here, and it's really getting more crowded.
It's getting louder and more crowded.
That's
here,
what we do. That's what we call backstage. Last question. We talked about at the beginning about symbiosis. Honestly, I really have to mention it. I didn't know what it is before I did this little research, and it's like, just to sum it up, it's not destroying nature, but working with nature. Can you please explain in an example how it works, and especially for companies?
So it's not an easy term, but it's actually been around since the birth of our Earth. It's how life works. It's a symbiotic Earth. Basically, we're in the Anthropocene now, where everybody's saying how bad human beings have been on the planet, on the environment, what they call the Anthropocene. Well, that's pretty negative terminology and vocabulary that we're using to kind of say how bad humans are. We need new words for a new world, and that's this symbiotic or symbiocene terminology so that we can transition to a better epoch, to a better world to live in. And symbiocene and symbiosis is really simple. Before that, people thought that what Darwin meant with natural selection, survival of the fittest, only the strong survive, survival of the fittest, severe competition, that was the way that the world worked. That's not how the world's ever worked. A world works in a symbiotic relationship, in cooperation and in collaboration. And that was discovered by a famous scientist, a female scientist, Lynn Margulis. And the term symbiocene comes from a book called Earth Emotions from Glenn Albrecht.
Yeah,
and he basically wrote a book that says we need new words for a new world. And that's kind of how it goes. The way our world works, the way our bodies work, the way our soils work is this symbiotic relationship one with the other. And that's not esoteric. It's something that can be applied into our organizations and into our lives.
Quick question and quick answer at the end. So Symbiosine, that is kind of your approach. And MHP is also shaping the future for a better tomorrow. That's their claim. What does your better tomorrow look like? Just a short answer.
That the world works for 100% of humanity without ecological offense or disadvantage to anyone, so that we really work in a symbiotic relationship one with the other without the disadvantage of any single human being on earth.
Hope to see you soon in this future. Thank you so much,
Thank
Mark.
you.